What do you want them to have learned? What do you want them? How do you want them to feel? And most importantly, what do you want them to do differently?
Welcome to the podcast about communication in business. I'm your host, George Torok. Did you know that I'm known as the speech coach for executives? That's because I help business leaders deliver the intended message for greater success. When you listen to this podcast, you will hear insights and perspective from communication experts from around the world. I'm delighted today to introduce my guest and welcome Martin Peremuter, who's the president and co-founder of Speaker Spotlight, a speaker booking agency. Here's 3 facts that I think you should know about Martin. 1, he has personally booked over 9,000 speaking engagements in the past 30 years. 2, he has served on the board of governors of the International Association of Speakers Bureaus for the past 3 years, and he was president last year. IASB's membership is made up of speakers bureaus, lecture agencies, and speaker management companies from around the world. And that includes the U.S., Canada, Mexico, Colombia, Brazil, the UK, Spain, Portugal, Netherlands, Turkey, Cyprus, South Africa, Australia, South Korea, and India. And that's quite a collection of countries and, I imagine, different perspectives. And 3, Martin is an avid reader. He reads 50 books a year, mostly these days about literary fiction. Martin Peremuter, welcome to Your Intended Message.
Thanks, George. Great to be here with you.
Delighted to be talking with you. And today we're talking about an unusual aspect of communication, and that's the professional speaking business, which, of course, has been around for even more than the 30 years that you've been around. And I imagine it's changed over time, and yet it continues, I'm guessing, also continues to grow. I'm sure there's been some challenges along the way. So my first question is, when an organization, typically a corporation or an association, arrange a conference, they want some speakers, and they want some good speakers, and they want their audience to go away satisfied, entertained. What have been some of the common messages that you've seen, and how has that changed over time?
Yeah, well, George, the industry has changed a lot over the last few years, and I think it goes back over 100 years. We've been doing this for 30 years, but there's agencies that existed, 100 plus years ago. So in the 30 years that we've been doing this, a lot of change, particularly in the last 5 years. But in terms of topics, there's certain evergreen topics that are always popular, leadership, communication, building strong teams. Those are the kinds of things that just don't go away. They're about human psychology and human dynamics, and those never go away. And then, of course, there's topics that come and go. Right now, I don't think this is going anywhere, but obviously AI is a big topic right now for conferences. Everyone seems to want to have a speaker on AI. 15 or 20 years ago, it was social media was kind of the thing. For a year or two, everybody needed a social media speaker, and that sort of went through a few iterations, and it's rarely something that anyone asks for anymore. But, the evergreen topics are really leadership, communication, trust, teamwork, the basic human functions that we all need to be able to live and to work in a world with or without AI.
Typical speaking delivery is roughly about an hour, plus or minus. How much can the speaker get across in that time frame that will stick?
That's a great question, George. I think, realistically in an hour, if I go to see a speaker and whether it's, one of our speakers or a prospective speaker, or just I'm at an event and it's seeing someone, I try to walk away with 1 or 2 things that I can take and apply to my personal life or my professional life, my business, my family, whatever the topic might be. But I think that that's a realistic goal for an audience member or for a speaker to try to deliver, is 1 or 2 things that the audience members of the audience actually take away and put into practice. And if you do that, it's a great use of an hour. If you can take something in an hour speech and make a change in your life or in your business that could have a long lasting effect, then that could have, untold impact on your business or on your life. So, I see, I'm not a huge note taker. I see people at keynotes taking pages and pages and pages of notes. And sometimes that just helps people learn, I think. But, I don't think it's realistic to walk away and say, okay, I've got 20 things I'm going to do. In a keynote, the speaker has an opportunity to plant a few seeds, get the audience excited about the topic, interested, and wanting to do more. But, the speaker can't follow around every member of the audience for the next year or two and make sure that they're doing the things that they've committed to do. And so it's on the audience member then to take what they've learned, try it out, see how it works, tweak it, do maybe some more further research into it, and see how they can apply those learnings. But one or two takeaways, I think, is actually a really great thing to walk away with from an hour keynote.
Martin, and what I'm hearing there is I think probably valuable advice for an audience member who might go in thinking, oh, I've got to learn as much as possible, and instead what I'm hearing you're saying is that just look for one lesson or two lessons and do something with it, and maybe at the same time stop judging the speaker.
Yeah.
What can you gain from this?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, even when I go, and I'm there, in part that's part of my job, right? Is to sort of evaluate them, but I'm not there, critiquing them. I'm there as a speaker agent, thinking in my mind, who are some of the audiences that this message would really resonate with. So that's part of what I'm thinking of. But I'm really just there to learn, and I try to lose myself in the talk. I don't have a checklist of how is their body language, how is their voice intonation. Like it's an experience, and some of the best speakers I've ever seen have completely different styles and approaches. So there's no right or wrong way to do this. I think it's it really depends on the speaker and how they can best connect with an audience.
Martin, what's more valuable or important to the audience, information or motivation?
So it's hard to pick one. Probably an old friend of mine, Donald Cooper, has been speaking for a long time. I remember 25, 30 years ago, he said to me, I have two jobs as a speaker. One is to deliver valuable, relevant content that's going to help my audience members grow their business. And the second is to keep the audience awake, right? Because sleeping audiences don't learn anything. So, I'm not a big fan of the quote unquote motivational speech. Someone goes in there and gets the audience all fired up and they're all charged up, and then they walk out the door and they have no idea what they're supposed to do. They're just all excited about something. That's not my cup of tea. But I also know that you can have the best content in the world, and if you can't engage the audience, if you can't get them excited about it, they're probably not going to do anything. So it's a balance. It might be a bit of a cop out of an answer, but it really is a balance between the two. You need content. People are there to learn. Even other than stand-up comedy, right? Which even a good stand-up comedian makes people think. But other than that, there's the purpose for people to be there, which is to learn. However, they're also there to have some fun, to be engaged, to be entertained. And, the best speakers are the ones that are able to deliver both.
Wow, and that's a valuable lesson right there. Sleeping audiences don't remember, don't learn.
Credit Donald, yeah. Pearl of wisdom from Donald Cooper. He's got a lot of them. Yeah.
Yes, Donald has a lot of wonderful, valuable insights, no question. Martin, as part of the International Association of Speakers Bureaus, you've had the opportunity to meet with and learn from and lead these organizations, businesses from around the world. Do they see things the same way, or do they have entirely different perspectives of the world?
Very different perspectives. It's one of the fun things about being involved with the association, and in the last few years being on the board and serving as president last year, is getting to know the members from all over the world. And the majority of the members there are U.S. based, but there are, as you mentioned in the introduction, members from all over, North America, South America, Europe, Asia, et cetera. As a generality, the U.S. there's a bigger focus on motivational speakers, I'd say, in the U.S. than anywhere else. I was at the convention just a few weeks ago, and a lot of the speakers were U.S. based. A lot were motivational. They were very good, but I was sitting with a group from the U.K., and they were saying to me, like, this stuff just would not fly in the U.K. This is not the kind of stuff that works. So, it's very different. Even the difference between Canadian and U.S. markets, it's subtle, but it's there. And it's there's a little bit more of a focus on the content, I think, in Canada and the UK, certainly. Not that the Americans don't like content, of course they do, but I think there's more of a focus on the performance and the delivery, and it's a little bit, that's a little bit more in the oral tradition, I think, of the US, maybe, to have, the more sort of motivational, rah-rah type of speaker. But it's also interesting just the different ways different organizations do business. For example, I was chatting with a friend who runs the Speakers Bureau in Spain, in Madrid, and he was saying that when he has a meeting with a client, he's saying when he meets with clients in the US, it's maybe 5 minutes of pleasantries, and then they jump right into the business aspect of the meeting. Whereas I remember he said to me, when I have a meeting in Spain, if it's an hour meeting, we spend 55 minutes talking about two things: politics and football, or soccer as it's known in North America. And that's 55 minutes. And in the last 5 minutes, like, oh yeah, okay, let's figure out the speaker. Okay, we'll go with this person, and that's it. So very different way of doing business. And if you're working in different countries, you need to be aware of the customs and that, because if you go into a meeting, I guess, in Spain, and you just jump right into business, it's not really seen as the right way to do things. And over here, maybe if you spend 55 minutes talking about politics and soccer, you might lose your prospects. So just being aware of the different cultural differences is, important. I know that this podcast is called Your Intended Message, and it's so critical to know your audience and understand the nuances of your audience if you're trying to deliver a message. So there's maybe some good learnings in that.
How, when you book speakers with an audience, what can they do to learn more about their audience?
The speaker, well, I mean, we try to get as much background information for the speaker as possible. So we send out a questionnaire, just getting information about the audience, about the organization, what's happening with them, what are some of the major challenges and opportunities that they're dealing with. And then, we set up a pre-event call with the speaker and client. And that pre-event call is so critical to the customization or tailoring of the message. And, I think some speakers don't really fully appreciate the value of it. They might see it more of a logistical type of thing, making sure that they know, when the sound check is and this kind of thing. But there's some speakers who take that pre-event call, really seriously. And we work with a wonderful speaker named Peter Katz. He's a musician as well as a speaker. And he has a line that he uses, which I think is so great, which he says that when he gets on that pre-event call, he says, the gig starts now. Like the event is starting not when he steps on stage in front of the audience, but when he gets on that initial pre-event call with the client weeks or months before the event. And that's an opportunity to just extract information, ask questions, and enable, the speaker to really understand what's happening in that organization, what the key messages they are that they want the speaker to deliver, what the key objectives are for the event. So, getting to know the audience, and that pre-event call is really the starting point of that is critical.
And that's a terrific insight. And I've said to people that your presentation doesn't start when you get on the stage. It starts at least when you arrive and you start connecting with people. You're on, whether you realize it or
Right.
not.
Absolutely.
People are already judging you, and you've got a chance to make connections with people.
Mm-hmm. By the way, I would say that the gig, so, if maybe initially starts the pre-event call, it probably also starts the minute you leave your house, right? Because I remember hearing a story of a speaker who shall remain nameless, but got into an argument in the airport with the person working at the desk at the airline, and was really not handling themselves all that well. And there were people in that line also on the way to that conference who saw how the speaker was behaving, which wasn't great. And when they got on, they didn't realize it was a speaker at the time, But when they got to the event, that person got on stage, and by the way, their topic was stress management, and they were not handling stress very well. They've lost all credibility. So, you're on from the minute you walk out your front door. And if you speak a lot, you could be quite recognizable, right? And people might recognize you. And so, I think it's just, to me, it's just like, always be a nice person. Like, it's not that difficult. That's, the way some of us were raised. But, you got to be aware of your surroundings and realize that whether you realize it or not, you're actually on more than you may think.
Reminder: don't be a jerk at the grocery store or in the parking lot fighting over a parking spot.
Exactly. Yeah. Or driving, cutting someone off in traffic on a way to a meeting where that person might be the person you're meeting with.
Yeah,
Never a good
and
thing.
giving him the finger. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Then you arrive and you sit down and say, "Oh."
Yeah. Exactly.
Now, more on that topic. How often do you find that the person on stage is different from the person off stage?
Well, fortunately with what we do and the people that we represent, we get to know them quite well. So it almost never happens now in terms of the people we're working with regularly. And it's actually one of our criteria is like authenticity and integrity and that, these are not people only who are great on stage, but are great off stage. But, you hear these stories, right? And I've certainly experienced it myself where, someone is, charming and wonderful on stage, but they're treating the AV crew backstage terribly, or they're not particularly polite or responsive to clients' needs, and it sounds like sort of like the punchline of a joke, but it is true that there's people who I mentioned talk about stress management and don't handle stress very well. Speak about customer service and don't return your phone calls, your emails. All of these things, and to me, it just goes to integrity and which is huge. We always say that the speakers who get booked most aren't only the ones who are best on stage, they're also the ones who are best off stage. And that's dealing with people on site. It's dealing with people in our company or the client in terms of how they show up for calls, how prompt they are, and just how they deal in general with people. So, that's hugely important. And we have quote unquote fired speakers before, not because they weren't great on stage, but because they were so horrible to deal with off stage that we just said we're not going to subject our team or our clients to this type of behavior. So there's not a lot of those out there anymore, luckily, but it's still, you come across it once in a while. It's usually because of ego, which is usually part of, I think, actually, lack of confidence, which causes people to act that way. But yeah, we just try to avoid that as much as possible. There's enough wonderful speakers out there who are also great people that fortunately we don't have to deal with a lot of that other stuff.
Being on stage, entertaining an audience and receiving the applause, that's got to inflame the ego. It's got to be adding something to it. So the best speakers, how do you find that they actually manage their ego or keep it diminished?
Yeah, I mean, it's a weird job, right? Not that many people, when they show up for work in the morning, have a bunch of people applaud them as they walk through the door and say, "Hey, George is here today to work." Everyone give him an applause. And then when you're finished your day, get up to leave, they give you an even bigger applause. Maybe they even give you a standing ovation because you did such a great job that day. I mean, it's a weird thing. Very few jobs you get that sort of acclaim or instant feedback. So I think again, a lot of the speakers that we work with have accomplished great things in their lives, whether they were, former Olympians or astronauts or CEOs or political leaders. So, in many cases, they're used to that and they've learned how to manage that. And so it's not a big deal in a way. But there are sometimes we've seen this, unfortunately, where speakers, as their career grows and they get bigger and bigger audiences and higher fees, that sometimes it can go to their head. And hopefully they're grounded by a partner at home that often is keeping them real. It's sometimes our job to share feedback and make sure that that they're getting the real feedback, because I always say that when a speaker leaves an event, client's almost going to say, "Oh, that was great," and then they're going to call us and tell us what they really think. And fortunately the feedback's almost always positive, but sometimes there's things that they've done or said that could be improved, and someone's got to tell them that, and sometimes that's us. But again, I think as a speaker, it's just, again, if you're confident in yourself as a person, and you're there to deliver a talk, not for yourself, but for the audience, and you're truly audience centered, then it's not about you. It's about the message. And again, we're lucky to work with some really incredible people who have accomplished amazing things in their lives and in their careers, and they're often some of the most humble people you'll ever meet. So it's often actually the ones who are what you, I guess, would call legends in their own mind, right? Who are the ones who are a little bit more difficult, or the ego can get out of control, and that can really, I think, hinder someone's career. It's just, it comes out of insecurity, and if you don't have people around you who are telling you the truth, then it could go unchecked, I guess.
And that's a valid reminder for anyone speaking any type of presentation in business or at a conference, that the only reason you're speaking is for the audience benefit. It's not about you. You might, and we hope that you're good and you have something of
Yeah.
value, but it's for the audience. And yet I have seen speakers who are full of I,
Mhm.
me, look at me. If I can do it, so can you.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, you can tell very quickly the person's orientation, right? And whether this is coming from a place of ego, and they're there for themselves, or whether they're truly there to serve the audience and the client. And again, as speakers, I always say, you're not there to win a public speaking contest. You're there to connect with the audience. And the best way to connect with an audience is by putting yourself in their shoes, by relating to them, making it relevant to them, not just talking about, as you said, me, I, but really focusing on the audience and what they can gain from maybe your experience and your expertise. And once you, I think, establish that as the orientation for a talk, then I think good things happen. But if you're there just to brag about your own accomplishments, and people don't want to hear that. People, everyone's dealing with different stuff, and they want to hear from someone who's relatable. And nobody's perfect. We all know this. Everybody's got challenges, and so a speaker who can connect with an audience, share their unique expertise or experiences that may benefit the audience, but do it in a way that brings some humility, some relatability. That is much more likely to land with an audience and lead to a real connection.
How can a speaker who's from an entirely different experience relate to the audience?
That's a really good question. I think it's a couple things. It's understanding that there's things that are commonalities that just exist regardless, and that's human nature and human psychology, right? So, we work with a speaker named Bruce Kirkby, who is an adventurer. He's been on Everest. He's crossed the Sahara Desert. Like, he's done some incredible things in his life that most of us never will try, nor probably want to try. But what he does is understand, that there are things that he's learned in those experiences that anybody can hopefully benefit from, and he really tries to understand how to make those connections. So that's a big part of it, but also recognizing that there are differences too. I remember years ago seeing a speaker get up. He was one of these Mount Everest climbers, and said, climbing Mount Everest and selling life insurance is exactly the same. And it's like, no, it's not. We all know it's not, right? And so, yes, there's some things that maybe we can learn, but there's also, from each other, but there's also things that are different. And so, keeping it real, showing the audience that you've done your homework, that you understand what is similar in terms of your two worlds and also what is different, I think is so critical.
And that's funny. And yes, there are analogies that a speaker might use, but it's got to be realistic. And
Yeah.
I am a when I sit in an audience, I am skeptical of what the speaker's saying, and I'm one that I don't like playing their silly games when they want us to do something,
Mm.
like do this, something with your neighbor, and don't
Yeah.
just leave me alone. Just leave me alone. And not everybody in the audience wants to play.
Hmm.
What do the best speakers do to accommodate the different personalities in their audience?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough, right? Because if you got a large enough audience, you're going to have, even if it's a small audience, you're going to have people with different backgrounds, different perspectives, different experiences, different learning styles. So, I think if a great speaker connects with the head and the heart. So if you can do that, there's going to be more analytical type people in an audience that want facts, they want data, they want case studies. So if you can connect with that part of people's brain, that's great. But also bring in stories and that are more personal, that maybe connect more with the heart. And I think that if you do that, if you're only delivering facts and data, you're going to maybe connect with some people in the audience. If it's a group of actuaries, maybe you're going to connect with most of them. But for most audiences, that's not going to be everybody. And but then if you come in and it's just stories and anecdotes and there's and theories, but there's no actual meat behind it. Again, some people are going to love those stories, and some people are going to be sitting there who are more skeptical, who are going to be like, "This all sounds great, but what's the proof that any of this stuff works?" So I love it when a speaker has a combination of research, research-based talk, but they deliver the research with stories that can really connect with people on a personal level. The audience interaction thing is funny. I'm not a huge fan of it either, but I have seen some speakers do it effectively. And so if you got a minute, I'll tell you a quick story about it. So years ago, when our kids were younger, we took them to Club Med for a vacation, right? So I'd never been to Club Med before. I didn't think it was the kind of thing I'd want to do, but our kids were young and they had a good kids club, and we were like, "This is great. Well, we can put our kids in the kids club and have a few hours for ourselves each day as well." So when we got there, there was like this whole crowd of people standing around. It was evening, and they were doing the hands up, baby hands up thing. And I looked at Farah, my wife, and I said, never in a million years would you catch me doing that. Like, to me, it was just like, ugh, this feels a little cultish. This is not for me. Did we pick the right place? I don't know. Anyway, we had a wonderful week. And at the end of the week, sure enough, there's this hands up thing. And I'm in the middle of it doing it with everyone else because I've been there for a week and we had a great time. And all of a sudden we're into it. So, I think the lesson for a speaker is, if you come in and do a talk, don't in the first 2 minutes or 5 minutes start asking the audience to do stuff because you haven't built that trust with them yet. So they're probably going to be very unlikely to do it. But if you're 20, 30, 40 minutes into the talk and they're really into it, if you ask them to do something, with their neighbor or some type of interactive, they might be more likely to be willing to do it because you've built that trust with them and that relationship in a sense. So, so I always think about that Club Med thing when I see speakers doing interactive things and think, did they build enough trust with the audience to be able to earn that right to ask them to do something? So, hope that's helpful.
And that's probably true of any relationship. When you first meet someone on the first date, you don't ask them to marry you.
Exactly. Yeah, it's common sense, but I think sometimes the speaker thinks like, okay, I'm on stage, so I get to tell the audience anything I want, and they have to do it because they're there, and they don't. You have to earn that. You don't just get it by showing up and being on stage.
Mm, mm. You started the business 30 years ago. You were previously a lawyer.
Hmm.
What about this 30-year journey for you has surprised you the most?
Ooh, I mean, the fact that we're still doing it, to be honest, I bounced around a little bit in my career. Had a few sort of quarter life crises in my early to mid 20s, and as you mentioned, I'd gone to law school. I'd done well. I'd gotten a job at a top tier law firm, was making good salary, had a nice office and a beautiful building with a great view, and decided that wasn't for me. And tried a couple of other things as well, and thought, am I ever going to find something that really resonates with me? And then we kind of stumbled into this business, and I was always a curious person, so interested in people's ideas and people's stories. And this was a business that basically helped people get their ideas and their stories out into the world. And Farah and I, when we started, we said, well, first of all, we didn't know what we were doing, so we didn't know if this would even last a year, never mind 30 years. But we said to each other, let's do this until it's no longer fun. If we're having fun, let's keep doing it. And if it's no longer fun, it's probably time to do something else. And here we are 30 years later, and we're still having fun. Some days are more fun than others. It's not easy, right? There's some challenges, but the fact that we're still doing the same thing, same business, and still fascinated by it is a gift. and also just how much I've learned, to be honest, from our speakers. I mean, we're so lucky because we get to work with people who are experts in pretty much any topic you can think of. And so, I'm a big believer that the two things that influence people most are the people that they hang out with and the books that they read. And if you hang out with great people and you read interesting books, some of that's got to rub off on you. And so we're really lucky to have this opportunity to learn from such amazing people every day. And I think it's hopefully made me a better person, a better leader, a better father, a better husband. We're really fortunate that we get to learn something new every day and really learn from some of the smartest, most interesting people out there.
And Martin, correct me on this one. I believe your guiding mission is about getting the right speaker for the right audience at the right time.
Exactly. Yeah.
And for those who would like to learn more about how they can do that, they can connect with Martin or anyone at Speaker Spotlight. And the website is in the link below, and it's at speakers.ca. Martin, as we prepare to wrap up, imagine you're talking to a conference organizer who's putting together a conference for their corporation, and they haven't done this before. If you could give them 1, 2, or 3 pieces of advice as they put this agenda and this program together so that they could be more successful, what would be that 1, 2, or 3 pieces of advice?
Yeah, I think Simon Sinek wrote a book that became quite famous called Start with Why, and I think that's a great starting point. Is why are you holding this event, this conference? What is the purpose? Because I think often we jump into the who and the what and the how very quickly, but understanding why this event is taking place, what do you want to accomplish as a result of it, is a great starting point. And then as it pertains to speakers, it's the question I always think of is when people walk out of that room at the end of that talk or at the end of that conference, what do you want them to have learned? How do you want them to feel? And most importantly, what do you want them to do differently? So, to me, that's start with the end in mind. Start with the why, but then think of the end in mind. And people walk out of there, and what is the behavior change that you want? What's the feel that you want? Because sometimes an event is like to reward people for a really great job that they've done, and sometimes it's a kick in the pants, right? Like things aren't going well, and we've got to change things, or we're going to be in deep trouble. So understanding the tone, the messaging, the learning is critical, and I think that's that is sometimes overlooked in the million details that you got to look after, and the logistics, and when people are eating, and when there's breaks. All these things are important, but I think if you lose sight of the why and the behavior change that you want to accomplish through an event, I think it's a missed opportunity. So that I think would be the key. And bringing people together. It's not easy these days. It's not inexpensive. Everything's getting more expensive. So you really want to make it count when you bring people together. Make sure that you're accomplishing the objectives that you've set out.
Valuable advice. My guest today is Martin Peremuter, reminding you that great speakers connect with both head and heart.